If there's one good thing I can say about Volume 2, it's this guy right here. This is what Volume 2 has that no volume afterward does. I'm not the biggest Monty fan, and I particularly loathe the way he handles fights, but he was a director. A director's job is to help everyone else do their job. He had vision, he participated in the writing process, and his background as an animator gave him the technical expertise to help them with their job. That's something Kerry Shawcross simply can't do. And it shows in Volume 2. Nothing important happens in the entire volume, but there are still plenty of good moments. This was the volume that convinced me that RWBY was better off being a character-centric series, with the plot stuff lingering in the background, and I was convinced by the quality of these scenes versus the lack of quality in other scenes. Now let me backpedal on that by talking about the first scene in the volume. Mercury and Emerald's introduction is foreboding. Sorry, but I just think Gigi Castillo is a way better Mercury than Yuri Lowenthal. We're given no context, and unless you watched and remember the post-credit scene from Volume 1, you wouldn't even know who these characters are. You might even somewhat correctly guess that they're in Vale for the tournament. But the small talk in the scene turns into thinly veiled threats and ends in assassination, and this scene is just really well put together. I think it did raise the stakes and put a target on Blake's back, though there is no follow-up to that whatsoever. The second scene I want to talk about is also in the first episode. The food fight is dumb fun in all the right ways, and the scenario and execution is creative enough to make up for all the animation errors and teleportations. #RWBY was always broken. Once again though, the scene would work better in a gag series like early Dragon Ball, because the more the show tries to take itself seriously, the more the insane strength and speed feats in this fight turn into plot holes. The third scene is this little exposition dump with the board game. I wish more of this came into play, like the idea that people can control the Grim and use them as part of their strategies. I mean, we get a bit of that in Volume 3, but nothing in Volume 4 and 5. I also think Rooster Teeth should release this game instead of begging and scamming for Kickstarter revenue on a shitty lunch money clone. By the way, how much does it cost to make some plastic figurines and some cards? Because I could do it on my substitute teacher salary. Anyway, on top of being an honestly ingenious way to give exposition, we also get some character moments. There are moments that actually break what the show is trying to do by making RWBY and Weiss incompetent, but whatever it's doing, it did it well. The fourth scene is Weiss trying to smile in the elevator. This is our first look into Weiss since the small reveals we had at the end of Volume 1. Upon hearing that she's getting her family involved in her team's mission, she practices smiling, which is really sad and pathetic, and I just want to give her a hug and tell her it's gonna be alright. The fifth scene is one I really tried keeping off this list. I don't like the mech fight. I was pretty hyped when it first came out because it was the first time Team RWBY displayed anything resembling teamwork since becoming a team. This should have been the Volume 1 finale. It did everything that the Torchwick stuff in the first volume was lacking. But I've seen the same kind of fight done so much better. Hell, the Geist fight is a better version of this fight, and I wasn't overly fond of that either. But despite my protests and grievances, this is one of the 10 best scenes in Volume 2, and I had to set my own standards of teamwork and my own attitude towards the ship-baiting aside and give the scene the praise it deserves. Because this should have been the baseline for RWBY action. This should have been the rule, not the exception it turned out to be. For the sixth scene, I want to mention the bit that turned me into a fan. Yang's flashback is poignant, and it summarizes the middle arc in the volume, which remains the most cohesive and well-directed chunk in the entire show. Sure, Raven ended up being a complete and utter disappointment, but I'd be remiss not to put this scene on the list. This scene and the next one I'm talking about are what turned me into a fan of the show and what first gauged my interest, which led to the RWBY on fanfiction series, which I've been working on quite consistently for nearly 3 years. And the other complementing factor to Yang's backstory was the interesting little insight to RWBY's character that comes in the very same episode. This is why Burning the Candle is the single greatest episode of RWBY. This is a completely organic way for characterization to come through, and the metaphor between dancing and fighting, directed by a guy known for fight scenes and his mad DDR skills, is not lost on me, but it's lost on RWBY, and that's the point. She does want to spend her entire life on the battlefield. She's always going to play the hero, even if she dies like every other huntsman in history, even if she dies like her mother. Do you see why I used to defend this character so adamantly? Why I firmly believe Summer Rose needs to stay dead for any of this to work on a narrative or thematic level? If not, my appraisal of her character in Volume 3 should at least come into sharp focus. The eighth scene I want to mention is Zwei's introduction. I like dogs, I like it when the heroes have a pet, and I think this whole scene is ridiculously absurd and adheres to Looney Tunes logic that does not gel well with the rest of the series, but is certainly preferable to Volume 5. Sheesh, Volume 5 was the Batman v Superman of RWBY volumes. Scene is one that hits pretty close to home. During all the stuff on Mountain Glen, Oobleck asks Weiss, Blake, and Yang why they want to be huntresses. Weiss gives a shallow response that doesn't really gel with what we've seen. Blake gives a response that might be a lie but still fits with where her character was at the time. Yang does straight up lie, but that might be on purpose. Why would she tell Oobleck that her goal in life is to find Raven and get answers from her? But the scene turns awesome when Oobleck doesn't want to ask Ruby the same question, or doesn't have to because of the very first episode in the series. Instead, Ruby asks him why he became a huntsman. He doesn't give a good answer for being a huntsman, but he does give a good answer for why he became a teacher, which leads me to believe that being a huntsman is a prerequisite for teaching at the academy, and he literally only went through the Huntsman Academy so that he could eventually teach there. And what he says is something that really hits close to home for me since I'm getting a degree in teaching. This is very similar to my reasoning, and this episode first came out around the same time I started entertaining the idea of teaching, so the scene really spoke to me. What makes it even better are the Goliaths, which hint at even stronger, smarter Grimm down the road, none of which we've seen in action, which was really disappointing for Volume 3 because they hype these things up and then they don't even show up until after everyone had left. And the last scene I'm going to talk about is Yang vs. Neo. It is a fun fight and arguably the best looking fight in the series. I despise how it was set up and how the show supposedly built around teamwork has the team split up for absolutely no reason. And I think this entire sequence was something Monty came up with at the 11th hour and the team had to shoehorn the fight into the last few episodes of the volume. But that'd be crazy. I mean, who could possibly doubt the man who came up with the maidens while making Volume 2 and then bent over backwards to make them the focus, leading to the entire show getting broken in half in Volume 5. So those are the 10 best scenes in Volume 2. I had slimmer pickings this go around because so many of the scenes are cringy and nonsensical. Next week, I'll be doing the top 10 worst scenes in Volume 2 and oh boy, it's going to be a lot harder to narrow it down. I'm Mediocrity4. Thanks for watching.